And when people do vote, when people do contribute to a campaign, when people do get involved in political campaigns, I think it's very important that they do it as Jews. And what I mean by that is that they make it very clear that it's a function of Jewish values as well as support for Israel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Proudly Jewish, Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I'm Eyal Bitton. Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt is my guest today. He's the founding rabbi of Congregation B'nai Tzedek outside Washington, D.C. in Potomac, Maryland. He has served as the head of the Jewish National Fund's Rabbis for Israel and is the founder of the Coalition of Zionist Rabbis for Israel. Am I right?
Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, ZRC.
Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. Rabbi, welcome very much to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and honor to be a part of it. Thank you.
I came across you at Stand With Us. They have a clergy division called Rabbis United, and you were on a panel there, and I just loved what you had to say, and the fact that even that we had this sort of leadership on Zionism and our Israeli connection, the Jewish connection to Israel. I loved what you had to say. So I wanted to know more. Tell us about the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. What's the mission? Why did you start it, and when?
Okay, sure. Thank you. I must tell you, first of all, we get I get one of two reactions when people find out that there's such a thing as the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. One is sometimes people will say, "Well, thank God," and sometimes people say, "Really? Is there a need for this?" I thought all rabbis are supposed to be Zionists, so I'll try and speak to those aspects of it in a few moments. But what happened was, after the United States had decided to move its embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, you may recall that there was a very tepid response, shall we say, out of some of the organized rabbinic organizations. And so at that time, being here in the Washington area, I've been very friendly with Israel's ambassadors to the United States. And Ron Dermer turned to me and he asked me to do something about what he was perceiving as the drift away from support for Israel and the concept of Jewish peoplehood, certainly the concept of the centrality of Yerushalayim to the Jewish people, especially among non-Orthodox rabbis. And so out of that, then, I led a mission to Israel of 21 rabbis from all different movements several years ago. And then from there, it was in a little more than 2 years ago, in 2022, that we actually formed the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. And part of the reason for the impetus for it was because so many rabbis had started to say that they were feeling lonely, they were feeling isolated, that they were concerned because their movements weren't speaking for them. There was a tendency to be critical of Israel publicly, and many of our rabbis are not comfortable with that. They believe it's important to strengthen the ties and to be supportive of Israel. So out of that really was the genesis of this idea. I'll add one other thing to it, one other point I want to make, and that is, if you look at what's quoted, especially in the secular media, but to a certain extent in the Jewish media as well, when there's a reaction to events that are happening in Israel of the American Jewish community, they will invariably quote such as, "If not now," Jewish Voices for Peace, which I contend is about as Jewish as the Olive Garden is Italian. They will quote J Street, they will quote Truant, Ben the Ark, which really are all very much in the same an echo chamber. And there's no one out there that's expressing a consensus view of rabbis who are supportive of Israel. And so that's another reason why I think it's so very important for us to raise our voice, to be a part of that conversation, to let the American Jewish public and the American people know that rabbis stand in support of Israel. And that's another reason why we started the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition.
No, bravo. I think it's unfortunate that it's needed. But Yasher Koach for doing it. You've said a bunch of things that I want to touch on, and I'm not sure where to begin with. I grew up, like you said before, like, why is there a need? I grew up in Montreal, and my father's Moroccan, my mother is Ashkenazi of German background, and the idea that we're all one people. And
Sure.
with, how did we end up in Morocco? How did we end up in Germany? Well, there's a story to that. And it's so now with your mission.
If I may just add one thing,
Yeah.
there are those rabbis, for example, who are not supportive of this. Not everyone's a member of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition.
Sure.
And I think that those who are not supportive of the concept of Israel or of Zionism, ultimately, at the end of the day, what they're really saying is that Judaism is just a religion. And that's so much not the case. We are so much more than that. We are a people, as you just said, Morocco, Germany. Look at where our people are spread throughout the world. And that's been a unifying principle throughout our history, both the centrality of Israel, the longing to go back, the sense of being in exile, and not only that, but also this concept that ultimately, at the end of the day, we're united and that we are a people. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to mention that.
It always struck me as ahistorical, this idea that we are purely a religion. It's not even in our scripture, but also in our prayers. The return to Zion is based on not a faith, but a story, a history, a lineage, a people.
When Ruth joins and becomes Jewish, she's considered the first convert in the Bible. She says, "Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." First, she talks about that concept of peoplehood.
It's now you're getting me onto different topics that I want to talk about, but I will go there for a moment. I've always found it, and certainly these days, so beautiful and progressive that we could be a people, we could be a bunch of tribes, historically in ancient times, and even back then, we could accept people from outside to become members of our people, to be seen as equal citizens in every aspect of our lives. And that people today look at it and go, what's your DNA? What's your bloodline? It seems too racial and remarkable that in ancient times we were that progressive that we could go beyond that.
I mean, we talk, one of the big terms today is to be inclusive, and certainly the Jewish people. You can become a part of the Jewish people. And in addition to that, within the context of our religious beliefs, it's so diverse. So what is it that unites us? It is this concept of a common fate, a common past as well.
Nice. I could, explore that all day.
Fire away, yeah.
Well, okay.
So into this vacuum steps the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition.
Yeah.
We currently have about 1,000 rabbis who are associated with our organization from all different movements all across the country. And what we've been trying to do is to build up our a network to let rabbis know they're not alone, and to be able to provide helpful and useful resources, as well as just even the sense of strength of knowing that there are other rabbis who share that position. I can't tell you how many rabbis have thanked me and have called me and said, "Oh my God, I maybe people in remote areas or other places, and they just hear what is being promulgated by so many, which is not the message which they want to hear. They want to hear a pro-Israel message." And I think, by the way, our congregants and members of the Jewish people are supportive of the concept. Consistently, over 85% of the American Jewish community, even while there may be differences and divisions over many things, at the end of the day, identify strongly with the state of Israel and with support for Israel.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed as well with this podcast. When I started it about 3 weeks after October 7th, and I was basically saying all kinds of or creating a platform for showing affinity towards our ancestral homeland and our people, and so many congregants and members of the community outside of where I am, which is Portland, would come up and say what you're saying, which is thank you for giving voice to what I'm thinking and feeling. And because they're not sure, is it okay to think this? Is it not?
That's one thing. So rabbis are thought leaders, and therefore it's important for us to, and we help to shape that conversation. I can't tell you how many times there are that I have given a sermon that is a pro-Israel sermon, and invariably someone who maybe is not a member of the congregation, is there visiting or is there for a bar or bat mitzvah, will come up to me and say, I wish my rabbi spoke like that. I think many rabbis are missing the boat and don't quite understand what it is that our people would like to hear from us.
Yeah. And so you just a moment ago did touch upon the following, which is the first part of our conversation. You're talking about the mission of your congregation, of the coalition, being so that these rabbis know they're not alone. But you also said it's also to give them resources to reach their communities. There's an outward. It's not just, okay, there's a community of us clergy. It's more, how do we? I suppose so. Explain to me a little bit more. How does this translate to the congregation? Like from these rabbis to their congregations?
Well, in a number of different ways. First of all, we do have an annual conference. We've had 3 conferences in the DC area, and that's an opportunity for rabbis to come together and have just been able to be totally immersed in study in a way that no one else is offering, both in terms of the caliber of the individuals we've brought, both locally and from Israel, in fact, as well as exposure to various individuals here in the DC area. So, for example, this past year in our conference, we also spent time on Capitol Hill. Let me just digress for a moment and say that AIPAC has changed their model a bit, as many of us who've been familiar and involved in AIPAC know. And so there again, what had been provided by rabbinic leadership there, by the rabbinic programs they offer there, is not there anymore. So in certain respects, that's another aspect of our stepping into a vacuum. To answer your question specifically, we do make webcast available where we do some webinars. We have our in-person conferences. This coming week we have a high holiday seminar in New York, and it's not just a sermon seminar, but we're going to be hearing from Israel's Consul General in New York, who is basically the ambassador to the American Jewish community, Ophir Akunis. We're going to be studying with Erica Brown, who will be giving us a brilliant teacher from Yeshiva University, teaching us about different texts that relate to October 7th, to Israel, and to the high holidays. I'm very pleased to indicate that we just heard that Michal Kotler-Wunsch, who is the Israeli special envoy for anti-Semitism, will be with us as well.
She's amazing. She's amazing, and she's an ex-Montrealer, as I am.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, she's absolutely wonderful. In addition to that, we're going to have workshops. How do you speak about and deal with college campuses? The anti-Semitism, not in the broad sense, but now, there's school boards which are having foreign policies all of a sudden, and curriculum. So we're going to be dealing with that. So we try and, come together to have discussions, seminars, webinars, conferences, and then also materials that we send out that we make available on our website. Very easy to find, zionistrabbis.org. That's it. And then in addition to that, we are working on prototype of a weekly newsletter we're going to send out to rabbis as well. So our idea is to get the message out there.
That sounds fantastic. And I can't believe how robust this is in fairly short amount of time. I wasn't sure when you created this, only a few years ago. And so
That's right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, you're in Washington, D.C., and I can't help but talk about politics for a moment, indirectly, I think.
It's the local industry here, sure.
Sorry?
It's the local industry here.
It's the local industry. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, look, the DNC just happened about 2 weeks ago now, recently. And there was an amazing moment when the parents of hostage Hirsch Goldberg Poland spoke, Rachel and John. And I'm not sure if you caught that. It was, or parts of it. It was really powerful. I don't want to ask you exactly what you thought of the speech, but rather, what's the significance of seeing them platformed in that way, being given this platform at the DNC?
Well, first of all, also the Republican National Convention, there was parents of a hostage who were there as well. Yes. And I think so there's a recognition on the part of both of the political parties that this is an important issue. And so I think that the fact that they were there, that they were able to speak, and that they were received so well, and you can see how Rachel was so overcome with emotion, not knowing what to anticipate. And And I think that that's very significant. Americans tend to have a very short memory. As my friend Ambassador Dermer likes to say, for Americans, history is what did you have for breakfast?
Yeah.
So we have a short memory, and I think it's important to keep in front of the public awareness of the massacre that occurred, number one, and of number two, that it is Hamas that's behind this. And for those who talk about and are concerned about the suffering of Palestinians, the message just needs to be that Hamas can end it in an instant. Yahya Sinwar can end it in a moment.
It's so irrational and obvious when people who accuse Israel of just the worst possible things and demand a ceasefire, not for 1 second could they say, well, if just why don't you release the hostages? Why not just do that? Why not lay down the arms? That way, and they could have done that, November 1st, December 1st, January 1st, February 1st, etc. And it's mind-boggling. So I am glad that, as you said, there's a platforming of this concept. Okay, and before we wrap up with the hostages and the DNC thing, I wanted to just, you mentioned the RNC, that they also paid homage, and there's an election coming up, and there's a lot of questions being asked within the Jewish community about not who they should vote for, sure, but is bipartisan support of Israel what it used to be, and is that a source of concern for the Jewish community in America?
First of all, let me emphasize that the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition is a non-partisan, not even bipartisan, but a non-partisan organization of rabbis from all denominations. So I'm sure that we have members who are affiliated with each of the parties. I've always said that I want the closest advisors and friends of the presidential candidate of each party always to be surrounded by Jews who are supportive of Israel. Having said that, I think that right now is a critical time. Certainly, it would be disingenuous for me not to recognize and to admit that there certainly is a pool in the Democratic Party among the progressive forces there. Excuse me. In many respects, I think there's a real battle for what it will be the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. I'm old enough to remember when it was the Democratic Party that was solidly supportive of Israel. I'm talking about Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, Bobby Kennedy, people who had 100% progressive voting record, and yet who understood that the values of Israel were the values that were consistent when the labor unions were 100% supportive of Israel. Now we have UAW that's come out with statements that are critical of Israel. We certainly have Bernie Sanders and members of the squad who are sharply critical and talking about a ceasefire, which would be to the benefit of Hamas at this time. So at any rate, I think that there is this real struggle. So I think it's important for those who affiliate with the Democratic Party, who are Jewish, who are supportive of Israel, to be engaged in that battle, not to cede the battlefield to the squad, not to let them take over. By the same token, we certainly should recognize that the Republican Party has made strong strides and efforts in that regard to appeal to the Jewish community. And I think one thing is very important, and that is we should not let our vote be taken for granted. All too often within the Democratic Party, especially, which after all has gotten the majority of Jewish votes in the last number of presidential elections, it's just been assumed that the Jews will vote there. And I think we should let both parties, let them work for our vote. And when people do vote, when people do contribute to a campaign, when people do get involved in political campaigns, I think it's very important that they do it as Jews. And what I mean by that is that they make it very clear that it's a function of Jewish values as well as support for Israel. Just the other night, I happened to meet someone who was a candidate for Congress here in the general DMV, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia area, the tri-state area. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, have various tri-state combinations there. And I was speaking with a gentleman, and a few minutes in the conversation, I asked, okay, the issue most important to me, let's talk about Israel. And as I was having this conversation with someone, it was quite clear, actually, they did not know much more than what they heard and saw in the news.
Yeah.
It's another reason why what we do is so important, to help to give rabbis the information so they can provide that to their congregants. Perfect example, as we are speaking and recording this, Israel is involved in actions in the West Bank right now, Judea and Samaria, to try and take out some of the different terrorist cells that are there. Well, for the most part, I have a copy of the Washington Post, and it talks about the Israeli action in the occupied West Bank, is the way they describe it, and so on and so forth, without the context. My wife, who happens to be Israeli, has been telling me for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe even longer than that, about the terrorist cells operating in Judea and Samaria, in places like Jenin and Tulkarem, and talking about the weapons that have been discovered there in mosques and in schools. Stuff that doesn't make the American press. Well, that's why Israel has now gone into those areas, because they don't want to do what they did with Hamas and Hezbollah. In other words, in those instances, it was Laban gay, let them go, and as a result, we saw what happened to that. So now they're being proactive. Well, anyway, that is not making the headlines or the issues or the news. My point is, then, I was able to explain and put some of this in context to the very educated, very knowledgeable individual, but his knowledge was not total, and much of it came from the media, which, as we know, does not present Israel the full picture. And so I think, part of what we need, our job, is to be educated, and then to advocate. Let me just add this, if I may, because I put it in the context of what our responsibility as rabbis. I think one of the things we do as rabbis is to be advocates for mitzvot, whatever movement we're part of, advocates for Judaism, for Jewish lifestyle, and things like that. I think we also need to be advocates for the Jewish people and for the land of Israel, where over 50% of the Jewish people live.
Yeah. Amen. Beautifully said, all of that. Thank you. I know that you've done with the coalition a lot of outreach. I don't just mean to the non-Jewish community here, but globally. You're I don't know if I think you were hosted by the UAE embassy, and you've done work with the embassy of Turkey. Can you tell us, tell us more about that? Because obviously I don't have the whole picture, but I know that there's been some outreach in that way. And what does that mean?
Sure. So at our first conference, we were hosted by the embassy of Turkey in the private official residence of the ambassador. It was at a time when, not too long ago, Turkey was courting Israel, which really was because of the fact that they wanted certain favors from the United States. And so we were able to play a role in terms of helping to facilitate those warm, hospitable relations. Needless to say, we've not been back to the Turkish embassy, nor would I even accept an invitation to the Turkish embassy under current circumstances. Having said that, through the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, we held one of our early conferences, meals. We were invited to the embassy of the UAE, hosted by the ambassador to the United States, who was just extraordinary, very gracious host. And out of that actually came an invitation for the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition rabbis to go and to visit the UAE as guests of the government. And so we had extraordinary access there as well. And one of the reasons why I felt that was important, and I had worked on that, beforehand to facilitate that happening. But one of the reasons that I thought that was important was because, in many respects, I think the American Jewish community is not conscious enough of what a breakthrough that is, the Abraham Accords, and how significant it is in terms of the potential for peaceful relations, economic relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors. It is extraordinary. So having been now to the UAE and to Bahrain, in certain respects, I feel a little bit lahavdil, but a little bit like Martin Luther King or Moshe Rabbeinu. I feel I've seen the promised land. I've seen what it can look like for there to be positive relations. And so much of the focus is in terms of Palestinian situation, which I think, if there was if there, I believe what Herzog said, if there's a will, there's a way. I don't think there's a will on the part of Palestinian leadership to resolve the problem. First of all, it's to their benefit financially for the billionaires who are the leaders of the Palestinian Authority and of Hamas, to maintain the conflict as it is. And they are, as Einat Wilf has written, and as she's spoken in one of our conferences, the leadership is much more interested in the Palestinian cause than in the Palestinian people. So part of what we wanted to do was to show that there are other paths to peace. And so that's why we've had these wonderful relations with some of the different embassies here in the Washington, D.C. area. Of course, we've been hosted by the Israeli ambassadors who have appeared at our sessions. When we've been in Israel, we've met with just in January, we took a mission post October 7th. We were hosted by the President of Israel in the President's house. The previous summer, we met with the Prime Minister, spent an hour with him, really dealing with substantive issues as well, and we're able to bring him a message from the American Jewish community. And it was, I think it's important to take it both ways. All too often, if I may just add, I think we talk about, let's be frank, we talk about Israeli arrogance. In many respects, we're every bit as arrogant in that we assume that we can and should be telling Israel what to do and how to do things and so on. I think it's important for us to also listen and hear from them as well. And that's part of what we've been able to create is through our missions to Israel, as well as overseas and elsewhere, through our conversations with embassy officials here in Washington and others, to be able to both speak and let our voice be heard in a way that it should be heard. What I mean by that is in the context of positive, constructive conversations, and also then to hear the concerns from the other side as well.
I think that it's breathtaking what those steps are, and also just the Abraham Accords themselves. It is, as you said, it is a monumental achievement, and I agree with you. I don't think everybody here, even in the Jewish community, grasps what the significance is and what the potential is. The potential of the potential of there being complete peace, at least with the Sunni Arab world, is astounding. And it seems to me that we all like a simple story. We like things to be nice and neat. In the movie, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? Simple, 1, 2. And in terms of the Middle East conflict, we say Middle East conflict, but most people think Palestine, Israel. And I think Abraham Accords showed us, wait, there's that what Israel understands is they're part of an entire region, and they want to be at peace and live with these neighbors. And they showed that it can be achieved. You don't have to wait for the Palestinian issue to be solved for there to be progress.
So very important, because so many the thinking had been, well, first we solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, and then we go to the others. And what happened was, and we had a meeting, by the way, in the White House with Jason Greenblatt, who was one of the primary negotiators with the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. Wow. While this was being discussed, he actually kept most of the cards close to his chest and didn't reveal very much. But having said that, it was clear that there was going to be a revolutionary kind of a process, and that is what's referred to as outside in. In other words, the Sunni countries. I think, obviously, as we all know, Saudi Arabia is the golden grail. But one of the things we don't realize, and this is one of the points that Ambassador Dermer had made in some of the conversations we've had, and that is that these countries came forward because Israel is strong, not because it's weak, because it has so much to offer in the area of cybersecurity, not because it is a backward country. And so when we strengthen Israel, when Israel is strong, when the relationship with the United States is solid, is when Israel is in a position to be able to both make peace with its Arab neighbors, and also that its Arab neighbors recognize that the way to America, as well as the way to strength, is through Israel. And so I think many people don't quite understand how these geopolitical factors all come together. And that's why we have such an important role. I want to mention, when we had our meeting with the Prime Minister he was flanked by a number of his advisors, but a couple of the advisors were his security advisors, national security advisors. And I realized that the reason for that is because we, as the American Jewish community, are viewed as a security asset, as a important part of the component of strengthening Israel's position.
You're talking about this outreach, but building bridges with Israel's neighbors, and us, over here facilitating that to some extent, and understanding the commonalities and overcoming differences. Now, going to the American Jewish context or sphere, there's steps that you've taken, or I don't know if the coalition has, or if it's more independent, individual, in terms of creating allies beyond the Jewish world here, the Jewish community, I mean. So, there's a lot of support for Jews and Israel right here in the United States, sometimes coming from places that the Jewish community doesn't expect. And what steps have you guys taken, or work have you done to build bridges outside the Jewish community and sort of foster alliances with Christian groups
Sure.
as well?
Well, it's interesting because there are I think quite often, as you alluded to in your implied in your question there often is a hesitancy to get involved and with Christian groups. Sometimes I wonder if we Jews can take yes for an answer, because I've been with Christian groups not too long ago. I was at a conference, and I was just blown away when I heard one of the speakers, actually was Pastor John Hagee, who was somewhat controversial for all kinds of reasons, stand in front of a group of Christians, and he said, "Anti-Semitism is a sin."
Wow.
I couldn't believe it,
Wow.
specifically, and he repeated it. So that's what I mean when I say at this point, I think we can and we should find those places where we can make common ground. At this point, when there are so many who are out to denigrate Israel, to demonize Israel through the various demonstrations that are taking place and the encampments and so on and so forth. Sometimes I think we're like a spurned lover, that we keep going after the progressive left, which has spurned us, and yet we still want to continue to find that love, and it's just not there. Whereas, where we can find it, we should explore it. And so we had in last year in November, about a month or so after October 7th, a month or two afterwards, it was in November, December, a group of Christian and Jewish clergy who went together to lobby members of Congress. There were about 70 of us altogether. There were actually more Christian clergy than there were Jewish, but we went together in teams to various congressional offices to meet with both staff members and members of Congress, to let them know that we're not just Jews, and and they're not just evangelical Christians, but we are here together, united, in order to bring a message, and that is that we are supportive of Israel. And it was beautiful. It was extraordinary. It was helpful, and it was important. And so I think that we need to continue to find those places where we can make alliance with those who are supportive and sympathetic to Israel. With one of the Christian leaders, I once said, I said to them, there are Jews who are somewhat cautious and suspicious about, they're those who talk about, well, they really want to convert us or things like that. I've not found that to be the case at all. But the thing that was interesting is when I mentioned this to one of the Christian leaders who I spoke with, he immediately said, well, I can understand why they would be suspicious. Look at our history. And in other words, many of them have done a true teshuvah, a true din v'cheshbon, looking inward, and they found that they need to change their ways. And so I think we should be receptive and open to that. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree with them on everything. And they're willing to accept that, and we should be willing to accept their love and their support.
I couldn't agree with you more, actually. Sometimes I hesitate to weigh in on an opinion and just listen to what someone has to say, but I agree with you. And one of the things that I've said to a few people individually when they've expressed, I don't want to say misgivings, but hesitation about and suspicion about
Yeah.
the evangelicals in particular, let's say, I say, look, a lot of American Jews for the longest time have felt comfortable turning to Israel and saying, set aside your differences with your enemies and make peace. See what's in common with you, and make peace with people who are trying to kill you. And I say, well, then look in here locally. If you're asking them to make peace with people who've been at war with, why not here look at people who've stood by you in the hardest times and shown their affection and support for you and the Jewish people in Israel, and say, look, I disagree with you on X and Y social issue or whatever or political issue, but I really value your friendship, and let's foster that.
Sure. I think that's a valid way of looking at it. And so at this point, I think we need to continue to nourish and nurture those who understand the nature of the conflict. Because, by the way, we have only tangentially touched upon what's going on in terms of Israel's war with Hamas, but it's very important to keep in mind that Iran has surrounded Israel with its proxies, with the Houthis in the south, with Hamas, with Hezbollah in the north, as well as with Iranian forces in Iraq and in Syria and in the West Bank, which is why Israel's doing what it's doing right now. So that so much of this comes from Iran.
Yeah.
And the fundamentalist, and I think one of the problems sometimes is that we Americans, and I include Jews in this as well, but we Americans, for the most part, don't realize and recognize how important religion can be, and how important religion can be in terms of pushing not just ideology, but even actions. It's why there are shahid, suicide martyrs, because they want to be able to get to heaven and things like that. So our battle is not with Islam, but it's with a fundamental Islamic extremist, and who want to destroy not just Israel, but to take over America and the Western world. It sounds fanciful. It sounds impossible. It sounds illusional. But the reality is that is why Israel is referred to as the little Satan and America the big Satan. And in the Hamas charter and in Iran's specific statements, they make it very clear what they intend to do and what their goals are. And we just kind of poo-poo it. Oh, we shouldn't. I remember Malcolm Hoenlein many, many years ago. I heard him once say that dictatorships tell the truth. It's democracies that lie. And he said, because leaders of democracies need to get elected, so they need to lie. But the dictators, they're going to tell you the truth. And when they tell you that we seek and wish to destroy you, we should recognize that they mean what they say.
There are lots of people out there whose criticisms of Israel mask a real intention of just, we don't want it there. And I have felt that whether you're on the left or right as a Jew, that you need to fight for your right to a seat at that table, and also draw the line when it comes to Israel and say, no, the discussion about Israel's very existence is not on the table. Sure. I as a Zionist have a right to be here. And I feel that that's being attacked on campuses and in organizations and institutions more and more in the States, where there's a litmus test of acceptance. You renounce Israel or you're not allowed in. Now we're going to this sort of anti-Semitic environment that we're finding ourselves in the States. Are you seeing that, and to what extent?
I'm deeply concerned about that, because I see it as a very concerted, intentional effort to intimidate Jews and to eliminate Jews from the public square. And this is not coincidental. In recent months, it has been discovered, actually even before that, but it's been now coming to light, the amount of money that's being poured in by Qatari, some $500 billion over the last 20 years into American education institutions. And it's not because they believe that we need to learn more of Shakespeare and Chaucer. They have a very much of an agenda there. And also in terms of the student demonstrations that are going on. I think that there has been too much of a naivete and a tolerance for some of the stuff. At a college campus, you should be going to class. And when you don't go to class, you should be having a fraternity party. It's not a place to be to have any camping. They want to go camping, let them go to a national park. And I think that there needs to be a greater recognition of the harm that this is doing. I worry about the identity. Now among some, by the way, this kind of assault has awakened a sense of identity. Oh my God, they really are talking about me. It's not just some other Jew. It's not just Jews with peyot. It's all of us. So in some, there is an awakening pride and understanding that we are in fact one, and we are all part of that. But for others, there is a shying away. And naturally, we see in so many different public places, Jews wearing a kippah who have been beaten or who have been abused and verbally, and whether it's not even just on college campuses, even on subways and public places. And so all of this is bound to have an impact. And I think that part of it is to peel people away from our not just our support for Israel, but indeed from the essence of Jewish identity, Jewish peoplehood, feeling connected to one's Jewishness. And so I am very concerned about the impact this is going to have, and that I think we have to respond. Anti-Semitism is not going to go away. It is referred to as the world's oldest hatred, and there are a zillion and one reasons as to why it exists. But more importantly, we have to try and make sure that they are the outliers, not us, and that they are the ones who are excluded from the public square, not us.
Yeah, I think that what you said a moment ago was about what the nature of this attack is on Jewish identity in North America is the greatest crisis of our time as American, I'm Canadian, but as North American Jews. And I don't know that people recognize it. Forget outside the Jewish community. I don't know that Jews. I know that some do. I don't know that enough members of the Jewish community or even Jewish leaders recognize this attack. What's your take?
I think that you're right. Well, first, I think the Jewish community is slowly coming around to recognize this. The reality is, it's been going on for probably at least 20 years, if not longer. Very quietly, and I hate to sound conspiratorial, I really do, but I think there's been a conscious effort to bring to this country individuals who will become advocates of radical Islamic fundamentalism, who are eliminationist, in terms of their approach. It's so complex, and it's on so many different levels. Academically, some of it is just so absurd. And it goes back to what we talked about before, the lack of education, which is, again, one of the reasons why those of us who are rabbis need to be leaders, must lead in this regard, and provide our people with the tools to be able to understand and to combat what's going on. We need to be able to talk to our young people as well. Some of them hear, the preponderance of so much anti-Israel and anti-Jewish kinds of things. One can't help but begin to accept some of it. You can't remain immune to it, and so we have to try to inoculate them to some extent through all the wonderful Jewish organizations, of which this is one of them, but there's certainly others as well.
Do you think that we've done, we, the Jewish community, and I suspect this is it's too broad of a question, but I'll ask it anyway, that we've done a good enough job or not good enough job of educating our youth about Jewish identity?
No. First of all, part of what the problem is, of course, we're competing with the openness of American life. After bar and bat mitzvah, all too often we tell our kids, do you want to go to continue your religious education? I mean, that's absurd. I tell parents, you just spend $50,000 to $100,000 on their, bar and bat mitzvah celebration. You have a right to tell them what they're going to be doing afterwards. And I also say you wouldn't give a kid a choice whether or not they're going to go on and study 8th grade math or not. Same thing with this. So our parents often are guilty. America, the openness of it, the temptation of it, and so on, is part of the problem. So we have to fortify ourselves. We have to try and come up with creative ways to convey this. It's one of the reasons why I think Jewish camps are important, Jewish educational programs. There are being many programs that are being developed which help to educate our young people in a way that has not happened before, which I think is very important.
So what do you say to those Jews that are very, very, very critical of Israel and say the reason I'm anti-Zionist or anti-Israel or whatever way they might phrase that is because of Jewish values, right? I'm sure you've heard that among congregants or
Sure.
perhaps even colleagues out there that cite their Judaism as the source of their objection to Israel. How do you address those people?
Sure, no, it's a very important question. I mean, there's those who will sometimes say it's not part of my identity and so on, and then there are those who will say precisely because of that. I think we have to make a distinction between the any specific policies and any specific government and the, as you pointed out before, the very existence of the state of Israel. We also have to understand what the other side is asking for. What the other side is asking for is and demanding is the elimination of the Jewish state. And so I think one of the questions we have to ask is, is the, or to point out at least, as you said earlier, that the existence of the state of Israel, the existence of a Jewish homeland, is an essential part of who and what we are. All one has to do is look at Jewish history, and the millennia of persecutions, of evictions, of pogroms, of forced conversions, and all those kinds of things, and see, why it is that it's essential that there be one Jewish country in the world. I think also people sometimes don't have a sense of the size of Israel. I'm sure you and I do, and many of your listeners probably. But if you look at it in terms of the map, I mean, it's just really a speck on the map. In many maps, you can't even write the name of the country in there. You got to write it in the Mediterranean Sea because it's so small. And so I think we need to respond to that. And the other thing I would say is I would challenge on that point, because I would say Israel is the epitome of Jewish values. It is a place where the values of the prophets live on. There was my son had served in the IDF over 20 years ago, and there was something called Toar Neshek, which is the moral code of the IDF, and it's something that comes based upon biblical and Talmudic law, and based upon certain principles of how to engage in combat. Again, you got to leave aside everything you hear from the in the media, because not only is much of it slanted and or by people who just don't know and understand the conflict. We have to also keep in mind that much of the reporting coming out of Gaza and elsewhere, those are Palestinian reporters. We just, a couple of months ago, found that one of the hostages was being held in the home of one of the Palestinian journalists. Yeah. And so, we have to keep all of this in mind and say, put all of that aside and understand and learn about that. Many of us know Israelis. Many of us are, have Israeli friends or relatives who have been to Israel. And I sometimes will say to them, these people, they are not murderers. They're not out there cold-blooded killers, even though that's the way they're portrayed. You know who they are. These are good and decent people trying to live in a place in which there are those forces who want to try and annihilate them, and that's what they're fighting against. I sometimes will quote the famous quote by Golda Meir, and I hope it's not trite, but when she had said that we will one day, the day will come, she said, when we will when we will forgive our Arab neighbors for having killed our sons. And then she said, but we will never forgive them for having made our sons have to kill their sons. I don't think it was just a turn of phrase or rhetoric on her part. I think it sincerely reflects Jewish values.
You mentioned Israel and going there and seeing the size of it and all that. And to go back to something you said earlier, you've led, I don't know how many, but you've led some missions to Israel post October 7th and seen some of the destruction and what have you. Do you feel like seeing it up close? And I'm thinking about how not long ago, I remember seeing Jerry Seinfeld on, I think, a Barry Weiss interview and being brought to tears as he talked about seeing it up close, seeing the effects and never having such a powerful moment in his life. Do you feel that the Jewish community have truly grasped what October 7th was?
I think many have. Have. It was such a disastrous thing. I think many have understood. The question is, do we remember it and do we understand, the implications of it? And what I mean by that is that Hamas, meant to do what they set out to do, what they've written in their charter. And Hamas is a tool of Iran. That Hezbollah is even worse, and that Israel, is doing what it can. The action, just take a recent one where they realized that at 5 a.m. Hamas was ready to launch a massive attack, and so at 4:45 a.m. Israel launched a preemptive attack and took out many of the missiles that were headed would have otherwise caused massive destruction in Israel. That was not an escalation. If anything, Israel prevented an escalation. So October 7th continues in many respects. And in many respects, people are still so impacted by what happened. We dare not forget that.
The anti-Semitism that we see in the States right now, you mentioned that it's 20 years in the making, or more. I mean, I'm sort of condensing a few things that you said. Some of the what we are seeing at universities it's not just a function of October 7th or the war. It's a mentality, an approach, an ideology that's been many, many, many years. How do you overturn it? How do we overcome that as a Jewish people? How do we change the narrative? How do we can we be successful at this?
Look, we dare not give up, and we must continue the effort. I think one of the greatest responses to those who wish to, be victorious as anti-Semites is to not let them be victorious. I studied with Emil Fackenheim, and remember when he had taught that there's a 614th commandment, and that is, "Thou shalt not give to Hitler a posthumous victory," meaning not to let him achieve what he wanted to achieve, which was the elimination of Judaism and the Jewish people. And so that's motivated much of my thinking over the years. I think that we have to strengthen as I've said before, to be knowledgeable and educated. But I also think that we need to be proud Jews. I think that is part of the answer to the anti-Semites, is not to let them win. I mean, but being Jewish has to be much more than just being anti-Semites.
Yeah.
We also have to be pro-Semites. We have to be pro-Jews. We have to live our lives as Jews.
I think that the answer to my next question is found within what you just said, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Crystal ball.
Yeah.
50 years, 100 years, 10 years, whatever it is, crystal ball in the future. What do you see for Israel, and what do you see for American Jews? Do you think that we have a future in the States?
I worry a tremendous amount 50 years into the future for American Jewish community. I worry about it because I see the trends of assimilation. I worry about it because I see the trends of drifting away. And so I don't know, but I am concerned about that world that the children of my grandchildren will inherit in that regard. And so, within Israel, I would love to see an Israel which is strong, not just in terms of militarily, not just in terms of economically, but also I think it's important for Israelis to recognize the role that Judaism plays in what they do. I mean, there is many of us who are familiar with Israelis know that there is a dichotomy. One is either not even dati or haredi or nothing. And I think that part of we've talked about bridging gaps. I would love to see more of a gap there. I think there was, after October 7th, there was some recognition, a little bit, of the fact that we are one, that there is that which we have in common. And so I would love to see more of that within Israel as well. And we've tried to do our small part with that in some of our conversations in Israel, by the way, to try and help to bridge the gap between secularist and religious Jews as well.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, for all the efforts that you're putting in to make the future for Israel and for the Jewish people in America a positive one and even a possible one. And thank you for all the work that you do with the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. Thank you for your time with me here on this episode of Proudly Jewish. And thank you for being so proudly Jewish.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I really cherish this opportunity to reach more people and share this message. I became a rabbi because of my passion and love for Judaism and the Jewish people, and to the extent that through this I'll be able to hopefully maybe reach some other people. I thank you for what you're doing as well. It's definitely we're on the same wavelength. So thank you.